Previously on Battlestar Galactica.
This is Ron Moore.
And David Eick.
And we're here to give you the commentary track on Bastille Day, episode 3 of the first season. This episode was the first sort of standalone episode that we did last year. It's kind of the only standalone episode we did last year, with I guess the possible exception of Tie Me Up, Tie Me Down. This was developed pretty early in the season, as you might guess, and we were still trying different sort of formats and styles of storytelling, so we weren't quite sure what sort of show that worked best on the episodic level. I mean, we had done the miniseries, we had done 33 and Water, and Bastille Day was really the first time we tried to do just one contained story as opposed to a lot of different plot lines and a lot of different continuing tales. So as you watch this episode, it's pretty much a self-contained standalone story. It's just the story of Lee Adama and Zarek, pretty much. It's pretty much their story with a minor subplot going on aboard Galactica with Baltar at number 6.
It's also kind of, I guess you could say, the episode that got us out of hot water with the network. We were still suffering the kind of aftermath of what was a controversial battle, I guess you could say.
A battle's a good word.
About 33, the first episode. And it was certainly in the spirit of, having a lot of support and a lot of love for the show, but it was such a dark tale, and it had such a controversial story point involving the destruction of the passenger ship that contained people, and the network was so, I think, for reasons that are probably understandable, anxious to see if we could play any other chords within the context of the show. And so this episode has, as Ron was just saying, more of a self-contained quality to it, but it's also got probably a little bit more of an uplifting or heroic quality to it. It also represented the first time that we did a Lee Adama-centric story. It was early in the season. We hadn't really done anyone's specific stories yet, but Jamie Bamber, who plays Lee Adama, was the first one we chose to center a story around, and as we'll see as we go through this, he really rose to the occasion.
Yeah, Lee was sort of an unusual character in that, in the miniseries, he came in defined solely by the relationship with his father, and it was a very difficult, dysfunctional relationship he had with Adama. The two had been separated for a couple of years. And so as a result, his arrival aboard this ship was, he was pretty sour, pretty unhappy through that whole miniseries. So there was a feeling on the part of the network that, maybe he was coming off too unlikable. And so we wanted to do something to sort of demonstrate other sort of colors and other sort of qualities of Lee Adama. And this particular tale presented a good opportunity to do that.
It was also, speaking of controversy, it was the episode that reintroduced probably one of the more vocal opponents of the Battlestar Galactica remake, which was Richard Hatch, who played Apollo in the original Battlestar Galactica, and he turns up here as a character I guess we'll talk a little bit more about when we meet him, but as a very controversial figure and as someone who goes toe-to-toe with Lee, and there were many promo-worthy shots of Jamie Bamber and Richard Hatch standing together, Jamie Bamber with his gun at Richard Hatch's head, and
the two Apollos together.
The two Apollos. I remember we'd set up this promo shoot outside one of the stages, and there was this Viper out there, and I was pacing around on his cell phone talking to you and David and Bradley about episode 10. And as I was walking around, I looked over and I saw Richard Hatch. Is the first time I'd seen him in person, because I talked to him, but I'd never met him. The first time I'd seen him in person, he was standing next to Jamie, and they both had their elbows on the wing of the Viper, and I was like, oh my God, what is happening? But I think the pleasant surprise, and I don't mean this with any disrespect to Richard, because I only knew him from the original Battlestar Galactica, where he was playing a very specific kind of role, was the extent to which he rose to this occasion. I mean, he was really, really good. He is really, really good. We've continued to use him here so good. So it was definitely an experiment worth attempting, and as it turned out, the guy who was most vocally opposed to the remake of Battlestar Galactica has turned out to be one of its chief advocates now, you have to say.
I was really in love with the idea that, if we were going to bring Richard on, his character's role would be the guy to say, everything about this show is wrong. All of this must be destroyed. And I just sort of loved that. There was something really delicious about that.
Commander,
and you'll pardon me while I ignore a phone call.
We're at Ron's house, right? Ron has a house that he rents in Vancouver.
It's actually an apartment, but who's splitting it?
It's and we're sitting here now. So we're watching this at his house. I've only been here when his wife is here with him, and his wife is not here with him now.
So now this is our bachelor life.
Yeah, so I'm sort of feeling like we should be eating fried chicken and watching porno movies.
Something on your mind, Captain?
I just thought maybe you had something you wanted to say.
I have nothing to say to the personal representative of the president.
I'm still Galactica's lead pilot.
So here we have Lee and Adama walking through the corridors, and we're exploring that storyline that sort of...
this is about the make a choice. Whose side are you on?
Yeah, and it's really sort of this continuation of the struggle between these two characters and the discord, the disharmony that's existed between them.
I felt that while, the problems, the specific issues they had kind of dealt with in the miniseries and sort of come together, and there was a nice warm hug at the end of the miniseries when father and son were reunited, especially after Adama thought his son was dead, and his son performed heroically in the dogfight at the end, and you kind of get the feeling like, they're all going to face the future together. But I thought that realistically speaking, that those kinds of issues between fathers and sons never really go away. I mean, they're always kind of there, bubbling beneath the surface, and that would always be a hallmark of their relationship, even as they resolve to sort of try to put it behind them as best they can. So this was the episode where Lee is sort of front and center, and Lee has to make all the choices and decisions. And as you've probably already seen the episode, or otherwise, I don't know why you're listening to this now, but as you know, at the end, Lee presents them with a fait accompli and just says, "This is what I've done, and you've got to live with it," which I thought is really great. Not only as a character, but also as just sort of a son standing up and sort of presenting something to his father as a man.
And it bears pointing out, it wasn't really about any of that for several drafts until we got to...
Yeah, we had to find that.
The latter stages of prep. And we've actually gone back to this episode in a lot of subsequent discussions that we found ourselves in other episodes, even into Season 2, where we'll get, an outline or, a script or, things that represent a lot of lengthy discussion that we've all had. And... the beats will be there. It'll feel like a good story. There'll be some nice dialogue, and there'll be nothing wrong with it from a craft standpoint. But you'll say, gee, what is it about, kind of with a capital A? What's the theme? What is the thing that really makes this thing emotionally resonant? Why are we going to give a shit about any of it? And we'll go back to, remember in episode 3, remember in Bastille Day, remember how we needed to find that it was really Lee Adama's story. And as Ron was just saying, it's Lee Adama's choice. What choice will he make? And then once we had that piece, it's not even that it necessarily impacted the episode in that profound a way in terms of the writing or the structure, but it just gave every scene a point of view. And it's interesting how sometimes you think that the episodes of television shows start out with those premises and then kind of develop from there, and they don't always. Sometimes the tail really does wag the dog.
The show is also an opportunity to start dealing with sort of the society and the politics of life in the ragtag fleet, which is something I would always sort of been interested in since David and I first talked about doing the series at all. I mean, here's this roughly 50,000 survivors of the Holocaust out in space on their own, and it's a motley collection of odd people, and how would they sort of adjust to that kind of life? And Zarek's character, I've tried to always use in the show as sort of the person who would ask some of these, fundamental questions. In this episode, he's questioning the fundamental legitimacy of the government that's the civilian government that they're all operating under. Who elected Laura Roslin? Well, nobody. Why do they have to listen to her? Is this really the decision of free men and women? Is this really what a democracy is all about? Isn't it all just a cover for, military rule in this situation? Doesn't anybody have a voice? And I think those are legitimate, interesting questions. And, the whole notion of the prison ship was really something that I seeded in a throwaway line into the miniseries. There was a line towards the end of the miniseries when Laura and Adama are meeting on Galactica, and she gets a call from the Astral Queen, which is an unfortunate name for a prison ship. but there you go. I don't even know why we chose that, or why I chose that, or whatever. But it was the Astral Queen.
Was it you or Tony?
No. It was named in the miniseries, and I don't know why I plucked that name. It might have some. I take that back. I think it's actually a Trek homage to like a ship that Kirk mentioned like once. And
did he call the Astral Queen?
Yeah, something the Astral Queen or something. It's one of those dumb things you put in, and then later go, God, that's a bad name for a prison ship. But anyway, it was a throwaway line that the captain of the Astral Queen had called and wanted to know what to do with the prisoners. And Laura had made a point of saying, we're not going to start just throwing these people overboard. And at the time, I always thought, well, this is also just a jumping-off point for the series when we actually get to take the show to series. And when David and I were putting together a list of potential stories and episodes for the network, when they were getting ready to order the show, one of the log lines was a prison riot. It just seemed like a natural that, okay, and obviously you'll do the show at some point where the people aboard the prison ship riot and it's Attica, and you've got that whole area to tell a story in. So it was always going to be one of the easier shows to sort of produce, and it just became one of the first three.
And of course, it was also the most expensive in visual effects of any show we did in season one.
Which is insane.
Yeah, and it's all because of those set extensions in the prison ship.
Guess I'm getting a little
Depressing? Morbid?
sorry. Been here longer than you. Wish I could say it gets easier.
The shot you're looking at right now of Sharon and Hilo walking through downtown Caprica in a very similar way is this very low wide angle is not to be interesting. I mean, it is interesting and did a nice job with the show, but it was to avoid backgrounds because we're in downtown Vancouver and you're trying to tell the story of a post-apocalyptic city. Every second that you're on film can't be draining money from your visual effects budget because you're painting destroyed buildings in the background or smoldering aftermath or that kind of thing. So here we are just looking up at some interesting looking walls. I mean, it certainly works and it's acceptable, but it's all means to an end.
And it started to sort of develop a visual language for what Silent Occupied Caprica was going to be. I mean, the first couple episodes, they're just out in the forest, and it's kind of. It was a little too lush is the problem in shooting in Vancouver and trying to sell Nuclear Winter. You were constantly having to really drain as much of the color out of the foliage as you possibly could, make it rain a lot. And then it just sort of took away all the opportunities to do anything about the ruined civilization. So you decide, okay, let's go into the city and let's just make the conceit that the buildings are not all destroyed, that there aren't bodies everywhere in the street. And at some level, what starts to happen is those sort of production decisions start to then change the storyline. And then the storyline starts to become about, okay, well, the Cylons obviously didn't destroy the city.
So why not?
Why not? Where are the bodies? What's going on? There's obviously a mystery. There's something going on there. And as writers and producers, you just start to embrace those things that you make because you have to, and you find ways of turning them into the storyline and making them generate yet more mysteries and more plot for you later on.
As you can see in the previous scene, the money that we did spend, the times that we did, go to a wider shot and see any of the city, it's awfully hard to do well. And, there's some of my least favorite visual effects, with all respect to Gary Hutzel, who's a magician in every other category. This is just, it's not Gary's fault or anyone's fault. It's just the hardest thing to do. You have to spend a fortune to make that stuff look good. And when you're dealing with an episode like this where our resources were committed elsewhere, it just doesn't look great. And you never really want to spend a lot of money on that stuff because it's not the point of any episode, is to, at least no episode yet, has been geared towards, let's see the smoldering aftermath of Silent Occupied Caprica. So if that's not the point of your story, you don't want to spend your visual effects resources there. And in the dollars that we did spend, you can sort of tell that we didn't spend a lot of money on them, and they sort of look it. So it is a constant challenge.
I respect that.
Really?
The things you've stood for over the years, the book you wrote.
The book that had to be smuggled out of labor camp because stumps aren't allowed freedom of expression.
Back to sort of these two characters, what I thought was also interesting, again, going back to sort of the politics of Galactica and the world that they represent, was to say that, okay, there are men like Zarek in this world. This wasn't, just a feel-good society where everybody kind of got along. There were people who protested and were against the government and did so violently. And that Zarek was such a man. He was an ambiguous character in that, depending literally on where you stood, you could call him a terrorist or a hero. And I thought that alone was fascinating, that here's a man whose books were banned. I mean, Lee in the scene says that he read his books, but that they were on the banned list, which implies a certain censorship and government sort of control that I think is kind of startling in this world. But that Zarek is this guy who, for reasons that are never clear, rose up against the government on his colony where Duala was from, and Billy saw him as a hero. And I thought there was something really intriguing about not painting Zarek as just a flat-out villain, that he wasn't just a troublemaker and a mafioso or something, that he had certain principles that he really lived by and that he was willing to go to jail for a very, very long time. and that then fate, lands him among the ragtag fleet with everyone else, and that at some point, he becomes the hero to this entire ship of prisoners.
All this was shot on a soundstage that was actually was in a warehouse, not a soundstage. That was not one of our stages, and a lot of that dark, kind of gritty, grimy architecture sort of matched the interior of this place that we were in. And it was a great location for us. It was only problematic because we could only afford, art department-wise, to build a certain number of those cells. All the time you go wide in this location, you're looking at visual effects shots, which is why the episode was so expensive.
We've got the guards and the crew in separate cells in Block 7. Mason is looking after the hostages.
Nice job.
Everything's under control. The men are organizing exactly as planned.
I knew I could count on you.
I do want to mention, as we get into more of the meat of the episode, Alan Craker, who's a veteran one of the only veterans, actually, I think we used all year, of Star Trek, who Ron had worked with before on, Deep Space and
Roswell.
And whom I had always heard of and tried to work with at various times. But he's a very affable guy. He's a very talented director. He's been doing it a long time. He's done just about every walk of episodic show. And he walked into a situation where really we had only done one episode of this show not directed by Michael Reimer, so we were still kind of at the embryonic stage of how do we make Battlestar Galactica when Reimer's not around, because Michael has a great deal to contribute to every one of these episodes. And it was great. We had to mention
hi Boxy.
Bye Boxy.
Bye Boxy. Boxy's last appearance in the show is this episode.
No, he has.
Does he have another one?
What's the one where they're at the podium and
that's where he's right here.
That's
this?
Oh, there
he is.
Here it is. I should watch.
Yes, with the famous cigar and sunglasses.
So for those purists who are wondering what happened to Boxy, he developed cholera. And it's unfortunate, but he passed.
I thought he just had a very special relationship with one of the other pilots. And they were off somewhere else.
Boxy, if you're watching this, we love you.
We love you. Yeah, Boxy, when we were doing the miniseries, I tried really hard to sort of try to include all the original characters from Battlestar Galactica into the new version. I didn't get all of them. I mean, there's no Cassiopeia. For those purists of you that know who that character is, she's not in the episode. The Jane Seymour character from the original is not in the show. So there were a few that dropped out. But somehow I thought that Boxy was sort of, one of the more memorable characters. There was no way on God's earth I was going to put a mechanical Daggett, no less, in the show. But somehow there was something about the kid and the kid among the warriors that I thought might be kind of interesting. And so I put him in the show originally and fought for him, actually. There were points when the network was begging me to lose Boxy. I remember that Mark Stern kept making jokes about Boxy dying a horrible death.
Yes.
through different drafts. And I just kept keeping him in there because originally the thought was that Boxy was going to form a family unit with Tyrell and Sharon, and that was a different flavor that we would have from all the other people, that we didn't really have families. We had sort of, romantic couples, and we had individuals, and then Boxy would be the one sort of kid in the show and would sort of represent, the families that we couldn't really.
But was that before we decided to make Sharon a Cylon?
No, it was, Sharon the Cylon developed after the first draft.
Right.
And then I wanted to hang on to that. Even so, I thought it would be even more interesting that if the audience knew that the mother figure in that relationship was a Cylon, and the father was human and the boy, and then they would have this sort of family dynamic. But what quickly happened was I thought that Sharon was not going to not realize that she was a Cylon until like the end of season 1 or something. I thought we were just going to play it straight.
It wasn't until we
got into water.
Or even 33, we're like, and then Sharon shows up.
No, it was water. It was the beginning of water. I was working on the draft, and it just was. I didn't have anything to open the show with, and it wasn't interesting. And I decided that what if Sharon wakes up soaking wet, and doesn't? How did I get here? And immediately you were going straight into the Sharon as a Cylon subplot. And we even had scenes that we shot with Boxy and Sharon in that early episode, which then got cut.
Yes, they did.
And then So the whole Sharon Tyrrell story started to change. It wasn't about this family unit anymore. It was about her dawning awareness that something's really
suddenly
wrong.
there was like, what do you do with Boxy?
And what do you do with Boxy? So we had long discussions about him in the writer's room. We started to say, well, he's the Artful Dodger. He's going to like run the black market, and he's going to be stealing stuff, and he's going to be trading in drugs.
It's still a good idea.
It's
still a good idea. It's like one of those things that you never have time for a little shoe leathery detours like that. The show just doesn't. It's so jam packed. I mean, this is an example of a better idea that we had in this episode. And back to Alan Craker, because Alan learned very quickly on this episode my penchant for cinematic references and going to this sort of encyclopedia of film, which kind of haunts my brain, and using it to punctuate scenes. What you just saw there was a literal reference to the film Jacob's Ladder, in which Adrian Lyne did a remarkable thing with the actress Elizabeth Pena by having her get in Tim Robbins' face with this very slight, very subtle makeup that you, with the naked eye, barely see, but there's some part of your mind that registers it, and it scares the shit out of you. And we did a variety of tests with that, where we gave her a mouthpiece, we gave her black contacts, we gave her white contacts. And it's very subtle, but it really was reflective of a larger idea, which was, let's go back to the number 6 from the miniseries, who we remember as the threat. She had, from the second half of the miniseries all the way through the end of that, through episode 1 and through episode 2, she was sort of, as Michael Reimer calls her, this Mae West on acid. And we hadn't really reoriented the character back towards that darker quality, and this was the first chance we had to explore that, and it was really great because Trish is so good at it, number one, and Alan was so great at shooting it and so willing to let us make him quote Jacob's Ladder, number 2. And finally, just it really gave the character a different spin. I think just as you might have started finding the relationship dynamic between Baltar and Six a little tedious or a little repetitive, then you throw in this curveball and you're like, well, shit, she's, spooky and I want her.
I need the plutonium inside.
Figure out the rest for yourself.
As you may know, the Cylons are susceptible to certain kinds of radiation, and by taking the plutonium and...
The interesting thing about this particular scene was this is when I started to actually use like Greek mythology in the show. Obviously there's a lot of names and references to Greek and Roman myths and traditions that were in the original Galactica, and they just kind of were always there. But it wasn't really until this episode, when I was working on the scene between Zarek and Lee, that I started to say, well, they really are polytheists. They really do believe in the many gods, so let's call them by their proper names. And Zarek starts talking about Zeus, and Apollo as gods, and what they meant in their tradition, which starts to, I think, make the audience wonder, what is the connective tissue between this universe and our own? Which came first? Are these guys our ancestors? Are these guys our descendants? Is it simply a parallel world that's sprung up that uses a lot of the same reference points? And I think some of the interesting things in the show is trying to track that, and where does this exist in time and space, and what is the relationship between us and them? They look so much like us. They use the same terminology. They wear the clothes that are very similar to ours.
Well, it's like I always say, in the teaser, so to speak, of the miniseries, in the scene that I've said this on the miniseries commentary, but I'll say it again. Ron had in the script a reference to the Armistice Station officer. Can I have some more booze, please?
Yeah, here's some more booze.
The Armistice Station officer eating an apple. And whether that was an overt measure on Ron's part or not. Don't tell me. I don't want to know. Don't tell me. I loved it because I thought, that's great. And, of course, now it's been cut because for time and it's not in the show. But I thought, that's great. The Armistice Station officer, as he's waiting for the Cylons to show up at Armistice Station, finds himself bored, sets out the photos of his family, reads a magazine, gets hungry, and pulls out an apple. Because to me that says, okay, right away we're in a universe that is, for whatever reason and in whatever way, a sister culture to ours. It's not some bizarro fruit. And as a producer, you also think in terms of, great, once I understand that principle, it means we don't have to invent the doorknobs. We don't have to invent the telephones. We don't have to reinvent every single freaking thing you see, because you understand that there's a connective tissue to this culture. And we have this conversation a lot. There's another line in the miniseries where the girl says, which I think was a mistake, because I remember the first time I mentioned it to you, you were like, oh, shoot. But I loved it for the same reason. When the girl says, "Then we're going to have chicken pie," and
chicken
then I'm going to
pie,
bed.
yeah. I didn't.
And
even
I was
think
like,
about it.
I was like, yes, chicken. See, chicken pie.
It wasn't even
How
like-
can they have chickens unless they're a sister culture? So I loved all those things. And recently, we're about to start shooting an episode tomorrow in which Gato reveals that he's been given a tattoo.
Yeah.
This is episode 8 of season 2, and the script calls for a tiger. And we were in the production meeting the other day, going, okay, well, is it a tiger, or is it,
Yeah. Is it a tiger with horns?
Is it a tiger with horns? Is it Tony the Tiger? Well, that's too literal a
We
reference.
should go with Tony. You didn't say that. It should be Tony the Tiger.
But it's all great grounding material, I guess, to kind of give you some root in where this is all springing from. And of course, we often discuss the irony that most people who watch the show sort of assume that this is taking place in the future. Mm-hmm. And I don't know that we think that way at all, as a matter of fact. Our sense of it is that it very well may be taking place quite some time ago.
We jumped over a scene I just want to mention in passing, too, where Ty comes in and busts Tyrell and Sharon and orders Sharon to stop their relationship now and tells them that, everyone's known and everyone's always known, but that was then and this is now. And I really liked that. It was something that I think came in and out of drafts of the miniseries, as a matter of fact. I believe there was a scene with Ty chewing out Tyrell or telling Tyrell that, he wasn't fooling anybody and everyone kind of knew. Because I like the idea that Adama, before the attack, ran kind of a loose ship. He wasn't a taskmaster, he wasn't Kirk and Picard, and he wasn't, sort of what you think of the tough military commander would be. This is a guy who had a really sloppy room, who slurps noodles and sits around and lets his officers get away with murder. I mean, Starbuck, punches out Ty, and Adama's making excuses for her. And he's a guy on his way out, or at least he was. He was a guy going into retirement, and he just sort of letting everybody slide and doesn't want to make a big deal. And then comes the attack. And I thought there was really something interesting about the series being about that ship and its crew, as opposed to being, the finest in the fleet and the toughest crew of all and the smartest commander who can always sort of see problems 2 miles away. I just thought, well, this is a much more human place. This is a place where people do things they're not supposed to do, and their bosses kind of let them get away with it with a wink and a nod, and they move on.
Well, and it underscores a larger theme, which is that in both Laura and Adama, you're witnessing people who are qualified, if underqualified perhaps, to rise to this mighty occasion. And it's a little bit more obvious, I guess, in the Laura Roslin backstory, because she's literally 32nd in line, or whatever she's, the Secretary of Education, etc. With Adama, it's a more subtle distinction, but it is there nonetheless. That this may not have been the best Battlestar commander in the fleet, but as it turns out, he's got a fortitude and an ability and a sort of natural talent at conducting warfare and at being, someone who can strategize and being something of a military genius. And it's interesting in that he is experienced and he has been through conflict and he does have notches on his belt, but he's sort of discovering his own ability in this category as he goes.
It's the hero in all of us, it's that notion that, heroes are born in the moment. They're not just sort of, sprung from Zeus's brow, ready to become heroes. It's just they're everyday Joes that suddenly find themselves in extraordinary circumstances.
Not anymore.
Is that you?
Nikki Klein, who you see here playing Callie, was somebody who in the miniseries, I remember Michael and I cast just on the basis of her look, because we thought she was really cute. She kind of reminded us of young Shelley Duvall. And Ron had written these 3 characters who none of us could pronounce. Sisinus, Callie, and Prosna, Sisinus, Socinus,
Yeah.
And so, we
They're all names I pulled out of an ancient names internet site. I literally
Really?
I found something on the internet that would give me ancient names, and I went through it and found those names. It's ancient Greek and Roman some things. They might be, for all I know, they're names for utensils. Those were the names I plucked out.
She turned out to be so good. I mean, we decided to make one of them a woman, and she turned out to be so good that we, in launching the series, we started talking about ways to involve her. And I'm very proud of a moment she has coming up where she does something rather nasty to that man.
Well, she almost died. She was going to die in the initial drafts of this.
That's right.
He kills her. He rapes and kills her. And it was and Lee...
And they're telling us we're too dark this year.
Oh, I know. Yeah. The second season is so much darker. All right. I don't think anybody... And I don't think they even cared.
No,
Nobody
exactly.
cared.
It's like, cool. She gets killed. And,
Yeah, Callie, Nikki, I hate to tell you, but you were the bullseye was on Nikki, here, and I can't even tell you why we decided it was. I take that back. I think it was your note. I think you said you wanted Callie to fight back and to really show some balls in the scene.
I think
she bit his ear off.
She bites his fucking ear off, and I was totally being. Just illustrative. I didn't really mean that.
And I wrote, bites his ear off.
I got the draft, and she bites his ear off. I was like,
that's great. That's tough. That's a tough kid. And from that moment on, I think she really became part of the show in a real sense. Once she had gone through that and survived, and Tyrell and the gang come in and see her in the hospital at the end, you kind of felt like she was one of the family.
Yeah. And she's taken on, in season 2, actually, a much, much, much more prominent role.
Yeah.
You have no idea how prominent a role she
Which is really, illustrative of, the rise and fall of characters. I mean, Boxy, we thought going in was just going to be part of the show, and we just never really got our feet underneath us in terms of his storyline and really how it fit into it. And Callie, who's just this other mechanic at the beginning, who's just hanging around with Tyrell, becomes a key element and, part of the fabric of the show itself. Oh, this is the scene with Lee and Zarek and Lee's triceps, as I recall.
They're located on
They've only gotten bigger.
Actually, it's a special effect. We shouldn't give that away. Gary Hutzel enhances all of Jamie's muscles.
I was so embarrassed today because we had the cast read-through for episode 8. My good friend Lucy Lawless is guest starring, who we're about to go have dinner with as soon as we get through doing the commentary. And I go up to see Jamie. He's in a tank top. He's in that tank top because he's shooting today. And I say hi to him, and he gives me this playful punch on the arm. But somehow he kind of connects with me much more solidly than he meant to. And it kind of, this thud echoes, and every one of the cast members looks at me and goes, and I felt like such a sissy. I'm going, it didn't hurt, okay?
So hit him back.
My muscles are as big as his. You can't tell because I'm wearing polo shirts all the time.
This is a nice sequence, too. Yeah. This is, again, why we spent so much money on this show.
Yeah, it's really great. Gary Hutzel, special effects and visual effects, and I think a great kind of Kara action sequence coming up. She just is so badass in that Marine uniform. And
oh yeah, well the Kara and why is Kara the sniper is kind of a legitimate question. I mean, in truth, a ship like Galactica, this is the first time we mention that Galactica has Marines on board, like U.S. Navy ships have Marines on board, and they're sort of security and they're trained for assault and things like this. And you would assume that they would have their own sniper, but this is one of the concessions you make to the form, to this being a television show. You don't want to just keep introducing tons of new characters every week when you have main cast regular members that you want to feature and you want to service and you want the audience to invest in them. And it was part of Starbuck's character that she was sort of the pure warrior among all of our people, and that she was a hotshot in the cockpit, and this was an opportunity to say that she was more than that. She was also a good shot out of the cockpit. So we just sort of said, yeah, you know what, Starbuck's going to be the sniper and she's going to lead the mission, and that's a better drama. That's just a better story than if we'd introduced, if all these guys on the assault team
were day players.
We're all just day players. You really wouldn't have any investment in this storyline. Every time you'd cut over to the Raptors and the Marines coming in, you'd just kind of be waiting to get back to the characters that you care about. So that's really the reason why Kara is the sniper. And it's great because it allows you to put her into a position by the end of the show where she's looking down the scope and there's Lee, and Lee's blocking her view, and she wants him to move out of the way, and then she pulls the trigger and Lee saves Zarek. And all the pieces of the drama just sort of function better because you put Kara over on that team.
She so sells it. I mean, you don't for an instant find yourself aware of a girl playing a guy's role.
Yeah, that's another reason.
She's so utterly convincing, and she just inhabits the role so effortlessly that you just go, okay, she's the sniper.
She's the sniper. And you just buy it, and you just move on.
I mean, she's quite, and hopefully by the time Katie Sackhoff is so bored she's actually listening to this, I'll have her wrapped up on a much longer deal, and I won't have to worry about overselling her, but she really is quite a discovery.
You You've been saying
This
everything.
Apollo versus Apollo stuff worked surprisingly well, I must say. I think going into the show, I was a little concerned that this was not going to really hold your attention as well as it does. But it worked pretty well. I mean, it's really a salute to the two actors at the center of the performance. I mean, Richard Hatch and Jamie really, if they don't work together, if they don't have a certain chemistry and a certain spark and a certain sort of, testosterone level between them that makes you wonder who's going to get the upper hand, the whole show isn't going to work.
Yeah, I remember Alan Craker, the director, was really very intent on making sure that all worked. Oh, there's the
ear.
The bloody ear.
The bloody ear.
I just remember standing on the set here, adding more blood to her mouth right there.
She's shot
and making the spit. Yeah, making the spit really big, and thinking to myself each time I walk back to the monitor, Taxi Driver. I'm finally making Taxi Driver.
Taxi Driver. Yeah. It's Taxi Driver. I remember that when I saw this episode on air, I started to really feel like we had changed the genre. That this is not the way space opera is done.
Yeah.
Just visually, the style of storytelling, the way the characters are playing, it feels different to me in a lot of ways. It just feels more truthful. It feels grittier. It doesn't feel like I'm watching any of the 50 other sort of space shows that you can name.
Look at me!
We have a couple of space shows as our lead-in, so hopefully that distinction is made regularly. Oh, wait, and speaking of quoting shots, here comes another. Alan and I had a number of conversations about the shot in my favorite movie, Dirty Harry, which is coming up right about now.
Aren't you lucky he's right-handed?
Yes, that is the I know what you're thinking, punk shot down to the move, the lens, the distance of the camera away from the actor. We were pretty precise with that, and I have to say it was pretty effective.
I was really in love with the idea that he was going to press the muzzle against Zarek's cheek. I remember that was the fight. I kept saying, no, he should push the muzzle against his cheek or his forehead.
Had Clint Eastwood done that to Andy Robinson, I would have been happy to do it. But unfortunately, Mr. Siegel did not choose to do it that way.
Just enough separation to be able to give you this shot, which is really the point of the exercise.
And so Jamie was so good here. It really, scary good. It sent us in all sorts of interesting directions with him, and continues to.
I was surprised, frankly, because I didn't know what to expect from Jamie. And when we
never saw him do any of this kind of stuff.
Never saw this side of the character. So when he really got in Zarek's face here, and he's scary and threatening, it started to really open up other story possibilities for Apollo that were different from the Apollo that we'd seen so far, which was very straight-laced and very proper, and also, again, to differentiate him from the original Apollo, which was just very straight-laced and very much a straight arrow back in the original series. And this Apollo, you get a feeling, is a little more dangerous, that there is. You push this guy in the wrong direction, and you may not like what you get.
Lower your weapons.
I'm still astonished at how much money this episode cost. This episode really did, if it had one big lasting impact on the way we tell stories, it was that, okay, we can never go to another ship and spend an entire episode there. That it was just impossible. That whatever we thought going into the series, and we really had hopes of being able to spend substantial time on the hospital ship and the school ship and all these the police station ship, and that was part of the pitch. Hey, we'll get to do all these kinds of stories, and then we did one, and it was like, oh my God, this is going to kill us. Yeah. Back to the Galactica.
Even Baltar's house has proven to be problematic and
very
challenging to maintain, because it's so hard to drive out to that location and move the whole company for what amounts to maybe 2 or 3 minutes of story time in an episode. You just don't have enough days of production to be able to afford to do that normally.
I don't believe this.
And this is
my wife Jenny's favorite scene, probably in the first season.
I just love this scene.
It's very funny, actually.
It is funny, and it's really interesting in how this plays out. And you start to feel like, this is where in a way, you start feeling the specific nature of our universe. yes, she's the president. Yes, he's the senior leader of the military forces, and this is his son. But there's really no one else. There's nobody else out there. There's no judiciary. There's no bureaucracy. No one's going to relieve these people. This is it, boys and girls. And Lee really puts his finger on it. It's like, well, if we're violating the law, then you ain't the president and you ain't the commander, and screw both of you. Mm-hmm. And he gets to say that because it's absolutely true. There's really no recourse. They kind of have to live with it.
And Alan did do a very good job at finding, or certainly allowing, that sort of tonal gray area to emerge here. I remember not being on the set for this at all, as a matter of fact, and just watching dailies and feeling very relieved that it came together so well. The truth is, I can't stop looking at everyone's hair. Donna's hair is everyone's hair is so much shorter. Isn't Mary's hair is a lot more styled now than it is now, isn't it?
Yes, it is.
I mean,
it's darker too, I believe.
Yeah.
It's also interesting, and just previously, if you back it up on the DVD, when Adam was standing over near the window, I mean, the production team is always complaining about this set in Colonial 1 because the ceilings are so low. And if you look back there, his head is almost like up off. He's like in a little hole where the window is, and we've cut off part of his skull because the clearance is so low there over at the side. This I love.
I love this. I got shit from Jenny, my wife Jenny, about the cleavage here.
Oh, really?
And then Katie...
My wife did too. Tara said the same thing. She was like, busting my chops about, what's with all the cleavage on Katie?
Yeah, and Katie's complaint is that not that we forced her to show her, but I actually think it might have been her idea, and of course, I wasn't, who am I to argue?
Just kind of, yeah.
And then I think she saw it and thought it was gratuitous or something.
I like this because this is one of my favorite things to do, is to do the scene that you think you know at the end.
Exactly.
You think you know that they're going to make up and, shucks it at the end. And he just shoves it back in her face and kicks her out the door. And I love that. I absolutely love that.
Yeah, it is definitely a signature of the show, which I don't think we overdo. I don't think we get cute with it. But
it's not gratuitous.
No, but we just did it at the end of season 2. Thank God I didn't have kids.
Oh, yeah.
That's the end.
Lying around doing nothing as usual.
On the other hand, we have the Frank Capra episode coming up where everyone's hugging and kissing.
Yeah, that's true. They do like each other on some level.
Yes.
Is it true? You really bite that guy's ear off?
He's lucky that's all I bit off.
That's my girl. I'm sorry, I can come back.
No, it's all right. Come on in.
This sets us up for the election. I mean, this whole thing of the election was something I didn't know. I literally didn't know when we were doing this whether we were going to get to the election by the end of the season or not. And fortunately, we did not, because I don't know how the election should go yet. But it was interesting to set these sort of pieces in motion and say this is something that the show's going to do eventually, and that they're going to actually pay attention and deal with these kind of issues.
This is where she says, she acknowledges to him she's dying, right?
Yeah, that's right. I was just, God, it's been so long. I was sitting there going, what's the end of this scene? That's right. Yeah, you can see, look at Mary's head almost slammed into the ceiling over there. Everyone hates shooting on this set, and I always keep forcing them back in there.
Yeah, we've been able to avoid it for the first 7 episodes of season 2.
Yeah, now they're back. Now, they're all white.
Yeah, as of this week, we're back in Colonial 1.
Can't we blow up Colonial 1? They keep saying, no, you can't blow up Colonial 1.
Allergies, but
it's part of the show. One of the other nice things that we do in the show is that we carry all these scars and wounds episode to episode. People get hurt, and it actually sticks around. Yeah. Which is really great. Is
that unusual? I don't watch enough TV to know.
It's very unusual. Typically, somebody gets hurt this week. Next week, there's no sign of it. I mean, for God's sakes, people, I've seen cop shows where cops get shot in the shoulder, of course, in the fleshy part, where it doesn't really hurt, and then next week, they're fine, In our show, man, it's like, Lee has a little thing on the side of his cheek, and next week, it'll probably be there.
It has to stay between you and me.
Yeah, Laura's dying.
In the fleshy part of the shoulder.
I love that convention. I only got, it's right here in my shoulder. Of course, you get shot in your shoulder, cops are on disability the rest of their lives because they got shot in the shoulder. God.
All right, so now what do we do?
Now I guess we turn this off and we do the next one.
All right, goodbye.
So we'll talk to you later.
Get this. No, get this.